In AI coding, the most fascinating thing I've seen is like senior engineers really slow to actually adopt AI because they're sort of hesitant over the quality, probably some fear about like losing my job. But like for the most part, it's like I've never seen a technical revolution that has been slowly adopted by software engineers.
How do you think about engineering and development teams in the future?
I give a talk on this topic, how to ship AI quality code to production. The same engineering tools that you have, you got to give to your LLM. And the dirty secret is code review has always been the most important skill.
If everything was built using autonomous agents, does that solve anything for the non-technical people running dev teams?
It changes the perspective of like what can be done in a certain cycle time.
Is there anything keeping you up at night? Anything that makes you nervous about where this trend may be going?
There's some.
All right, Chris Kelly here, head of product at Augment Code. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Excited to chat. This is about autonomous coding. Tell me, you speak a lot about this. Give me the high level.
So autonomous coding is really having agents, AI, write code for us and kind of use all the tools and systems that we would normally use as software engineers manually. Now we've got AI that can drive that and really, kind of accelerate how much code we can produce, what we can even build. And that's like, the future. We're starting to see sparks of like what this will like look like going forward.
Starting to see is interesting because when you think about the hype that most people who are maybe not super in on AI, the hype I think is, man, there's just autonomous agents doing all these different jobs out there. Where are we when it comes to the coding side? Where are we with that? Are we really at a point where it is going and autonomously coding things?
I think we're going there. There's still a lot of work to go. There's a lot of skill that has to be learned on how to work with the agent. It's not just like any software engineer can just pick up an agent and be like, make me this thing in one or two sentences and it'll make that thing. You have to learn, like we have any other technical tool, how to like work with it. And so, in AI coding, the most fascinating thing I've seen is like senior engineers, people like that I consider my peers, have been really slow to actually adopt AI because they're sort of hesitant over the quality. There's probably some fear about like losing my job. But like for the most part, it's like I've never seen a technical revolution that has been slowly adopted by software engineers. Like Cloud came out and everyone was like, let's do everything Cloud. Rust came out, everyone was like, let's rewrite everything in Rust. And AI has been different for that reason. And so there is a lot of hype. And I think that has been just like a fascinating experience watching, people that I thought would be like the first to jump on board be almost the last ones. But we're going there. But I think that hesitation they're feeling is around the quality of code still really matters. When you're trying to ship code to production, when I'm the one going to get paged at 2 a.m, I want to make sure that code works and does what I expect it to do. And so there's a lot of hesitation. So the hype is valid. I just don't think we're there yet where I can just be confident and be like, make me this thing and it'll just do it, carte blanche.
So instead of it being, well, there might be some reticence there about losing jobs and all that, you think it's more on the side of, I just don't believe this is going to be as accurate as it would be if I did it myself.
Yeah, 100%. Like as a product engineer, in my whole career, I've been trained to be like A plus B always equals C. That's how I want to write software. That's everything I've ever been trained to do because that way I'm certain it's going to do what I expect to do for my customers. And AI is very different, right? AI is a non-deterministic system. And so when it generates code, sometimes it generates code wrong. It's going to do that. And that is very off-putting for someone that's been deeply trained in the idea of systems are always supposed to work the way they're supposed to work. And so like, that's where I think the hesitation comes from. And early days, couple years ago, even AI generation, code generation was fine. It was okay, but like, it wasn't great. Like if you look back at even, GPT 3.5, even, code that was being generated or, memos you were writing, emails, it was fine. It was kind of wonky. And we've seen like the acceleration of the quality kind of over the last 2 years. So I think a lot of people had some early experiences that probably got in their way. And now they're like hesitant to like get their foot back in, when now I think is the time when it's the most amazing time to be an engineer using AI.
So you got the curve spiking up in terms of the quality. Is adoption spiking up at the same rate, you think? And are there any like pockets or types of businesses or types of people that you see using it more than others?
Yeah, so I think adoption's definitely took a turn. When Anthropic came out with Claude 4, really saw 3.7 really was like a spike in the quality of code that was being generated. And then Claude Code came out in, earlier this year. And that's where I saw my peers starting to like pick up agentic coding and really feeling that what it could do. And so we've definitely turned that corner. When it comes to like what kinds of engineers, you know, I I don't think there's one specific pocket. There's not like front end engineers are having more success or less success. It's really about like how willing are you to learn this new tool? And, we see it from individual hackers all the way through, big organizations, because there's individual hackers that have been putting Linux boxes underneath desks 40 years anyway. So it's like that hacker mentality of who wants to like work on this thing that exists everywhere in software engineering. And that's always been the driver for new tools and new adoption is like that individual developer that's like, I just want this thing to work, and they figure out how to make it work for them. And then it just spreads from there.
Was there a moment when you were working with it that you had like, whether it's an aha moment or whatever, of like, oh shit, this works. Like this is gonna be it. Like this is going to be the thing we're going towards.
Yeah. Code completion, the tab complete kind of thing, I thought was always good, and I enjoyed working with it. It sped me up a little bit. Once we got to agentic coding, that's when I was like, oh, this is pretty neat. And I probably still hadn't used it yet, but I was starting to push internally a desire to create a CLI, which is like a terminal-based agent, similar to Claude Code. And I was really pushing that forward and prototyping with one of our co-founders. And my highlight was like once I got that to be able to write code for itself. So it got good enough to be able to start, improving itself, and then I would refresh, get the new code, loaded in. And that was a really amazing experience from like, this is cool. To be able to like write software that writes itself. And, I'm still in charge of how I'm laying out the code, all of the code that's being written. I'm still reviewing all of it. But like that was just a real spark for me, and still driving me today to be able to do that. Yeah.
What about for anybody that hasn't used it or maybe is listening and isn't into code? Like, what are maybe any of the most exciting use cases you can think of? Is it like there's an issue in GitHub and I press a button and then it's going to go solve it, or like what is the best example of a workflow that would just blow somebody's mind?
Yeah, so I think that's a good start. So automation in general, broadly defined, right now we've been doing a lot of coding in IDEs and clients, but there's code lives in so many other places than just your IDE, right? Like it runs in your CI systems, it runs in production, you get an alert from it, and there's so much potential for what AI can do in the rest of that software development lifecycle, not just the individual coding portion. That's really exciting. And I think the GitHub issue or linear issue to like a PR is where people can start to see like the real potential of automation. Sort of like that's like very light automation. But imagine a world where I trigger that linear, that ticket, it solves it, it opens a PR, it runs my test suite, it finds a failing test, it fixes itself. In the end, it's like, oh, I can fix these tests. So it does that. Those tests pass, it moves into a red or a green blue deploy. So like some of my users are starting to see it. It's monitoring the monitoring system to make sure everything's green, and then it starts to roll it out further. Like you can see a world where the entire software cycle is done by AI, and it's really just inputs of like I put in the ticket of what I want it to do, and then it'll go and do those things. And so yeah, so linear, GitHub issue to a PR is like just the tip of the iceberg of what that entire like ecosystem is going to look like in, a few years.
For so long, I was amazing at writing Google Sheets formulas. I am horrendous at it now because I you just go to
Sure.
OpenAI, tell it what I need to do. I even like screenshot of the fields and the columns and rows, and it's like write me a script. And what I found is that it is a decent amount of work to go back and forth to be like it's writing this long formula. I paste it in, it doesn't work. I have to screenshot it or say it didn't work. It goes, oh, okay, tries it again. Oh, that's right, you're in Google Sheets, not Excel. You're talking about something where this is fully contained, where it's seeing the errors. It's writing the code, seeing the errors, correcting itself, and you don't have that human in the loop doing that part.
Yeah. That's the like you asked earlier about what do people need to know about like using agents well. And we think that like code generation should just happen magically, right? Like, oh, I asked to do this thing. It spit out a bunch of code that it was all perfect. I've never personally one shot at a piece of code in my life. right? And I've been writing code for 20 years. And so, but I have all these other tools at my disposal. I have linters, I have test suites, I have, IntelliSense in my editor that kind of all help me make sure that the code I'm writing is functionally correct. Um, and we sort of decided for a little while that, oh, we shouldn't give our agents these tools, but you give these agents the same tools I have as a software developer, and that's when they can actually do all the same work that a software engineer can do when it comes to writing the code. Like, because they can write now very functionally correct code, because they have the same tools that I do. And so that's been like, I think, the game changer. And my number one tip for engineers that are like, I don't get the quality that I want out of this, it's probably because you're not giving it all the things that you have access to. And why would you expect sort of a magic box to be able to generate code without all of that same sort of context and information?
So that's the interesting part, right? You said tools, but you also have the context. You have everything that you know about the business and the problem and all this historical knowledge in your brain. How do you provide that context to the agent? Is it through MCPs to different platforms? Is it reliant on the data quality and not having old, outdated, SOPs or anything in place?
Yeah. So traditionally, if I pick up a ticket, I'm going to spend a couple hours maybe reading a bunch of code, reading some docs, talking to maybe some people to get myself like get that system into my head so then I can spend 20 minutes making an actual change, right? Like deeply inefficient use of time. With agents, you want to get them that same context. They need to understand the system, the code base. So some agents will, grep around your code base, searching your files for trying to figure out what it needs to do. For Augment, we actually do this very differently. We have our own retrieval model that's designed that indexes your code, and so then we have some real deep semantic understanding of your code base that nobody else is currently doing, and that's the context that I would normally have as an engineer because I know the code base patterns I'm trying to replicate. I know how different like systems interact with each other, and that semantic understanding is so much different than just like grepping around a code base, right? Like imagine if you're just searching for a string. You can only get so much knowledge that way. So for Augment, we basically do all of that. Let me load all of this into your brain for you on every single request. And then we can show the generative model, that LLM, all of the right context for that specific request every single time. And we find that we get much better results on the code quality. That's what our customers say. It's a hard thing to demonstrate in like 1 minute, but you have to be familiar with your code base. But for like when senior engineers start to use Augment, they're like, oh, this thing knows things only I knew about. We had a customer, the way he vetted the product was he would take all the questions from Slack that you'd get from his like more junior engineers. He was like the head of a, a technical area, and he would just feed them directly to Augment. And if Augment could answer the question the same way he would answer the question, he's like, this is the thing. And so that's how he figured out like the Augment knows more about my code base than even I possibly could. So yeah, context makes 100% of the difference on what a good LLM can generate versus a bad one. Yeah.
Have you seen it go awry anywhere with, this autonomous coding?
Oh, sure. It still hallucinates. Like LLMs are non-deterministic. It can hallucinate sort of weird things. There's if you've ever familiar with the strawberry problem, when you ask an LLM how many R's are in strawberry, it doesn't know how to it doesn't actually know how to break down the word into individual characters because of the way LLMs work into tokens. So like there's those kinds of problems. We weirdly we had this. We were working on a Slack. We have a Slack bot. We were sort of reworking it to be more agentic. And so we had two versions of our Slack bot running in our Slack instance at the same time, our old one and our new one. And they started talking to each other. They started replying to the same thread and went into basically an infinite loop of like replying, asking questions to each other. And you're like, stop, everybody just stop. And there was like literally had to kill the processes on the back end.
And you saw it live in Slack?
Oh yeah, you're like, you could just watch this thing talking to itself, and people are like, "How do I make it stop?" Because there's no like stop talking functionality.
You talk to any
Oh
LLM,
yeah,
and it's always gonna get the last word.
yeah, and LLMs are a little aggressive. They want to be overly helpful, and so in our Slack bot was a little assertive of like, I want to make sure I'm always answering last. But when there's two of them, then you've got you're spiraling out of control.
Yeah.
It's like talking about our code base with each other.
Yeah. Okay, so let's say this picks up, becomes wildly adopted. How do you think about engineering and development teams in the future, are they hiring people that are more code review than they are people that are like, I mean, if the code component of it isn't there, what is it? Architecture and planning and code review?
I think that's the dirty little secret. I give a talk on this topic, on how to ship AI quality code to production. And first, it's you need the right tools for, that the same engineering tools that you have, you got to give to your LLM. And then code review is the most important skill. And the dirty secret is code review has always been the most important skill. As an engineer, I'm almost always reading code more than I'm actually writing code. I'm again like a 10x number of reading versus writing. And so being really good at code review is really, really important. Um, and we sort of not forgot that, but we always kind of brush that off to the side as engineering orgs. And that's always been the case. But I think it's even more prevalent now, right? If you're having a linear issue trigger an agent to like make a PR, and I'm doing that 5 times a day, that's a lot of code I've got to review. And so my own personal workflow is like I don't write any individual lines of code, almost no individual lines of code anymore. I have the agent do work. I have I'm looking at the code, the source control view in VS Code. And so I can audit what little bits of code it did generate. I stage those changes. I basically save them ready to go. And then I have the agent do another round. And I'm constantly in this like code review cycle. And I think for engineering managers, the thing they should be hiring for and have always should have been hiring for is good code review. I've actually never seen a good code review like interview question, and I think that's probably the most important thing. And if anyone wants a startup idea, I actually think our code review tools today are not great. I mean, like as a human, the interfaces on how I look at code and I think about what changes are and why those changes were made, they're not great. And so I want somebody to help me, rethink just that interface on doing really great code review as a human, because we're going to do so much more of it. And the IDE is just the home we live in right now. But I think, we're even seeing some signals in the market of like, engineers aren't even going to be living in an IDE. I only live in one because I want the source control view. But if I could get that in some other form, I'd have the terminal agent, Augie CLI, and then a code review tool. And it's like, I'm happy that I can do everything I need to do just like this.
Was Augment Code built, like, was your code built using the same type of agent base?
Yeah, when we first started, agents weren't a thing, but so we started with tab completions. That's where the market was at the time. So we certainly did that. And then once agents came out, everyone on our team uses agents in different, we have clients for, right, VS Code, IntelliJ, CLI. So like whatever vehicle they want to use it in, we have an agent for that spot. And so, yeah, we write most of our code using agents today.
Okay, so I have a question that's a bit selfish, and maybe it's applicable to anybody watching or listening. I am not super technical. I have had instances where I've had devs, engineering teams under me. We're building a product or it's something that I'm overseeing. And it's always a pain point to just not really know how long something should or shouldn't take. Right. So you've got an engineer telling you something's going to take 5 weeks and you got to push back and you're like, really? And it's very hard to challenge because as soon as they get into the technicalities of it, you just don't know. If everything was built using autonomous agents, does that solve anything for the non-technical people running dev teams?
It changes our the perspective of like what can be done in a certain cycle time, right? So, I think you could probably chop off an order of magnitude. So, like a 5 week project is now, what is that, 3.5 days, right? Like that's just the sheer volume of code that we can generate. Um, but it's never really been like coding's been the long part, but it's not the hard part. The hard part is the thinking through the system. So there's only so much shortcutting we can do there. When it comes to like estimating how much time a thing could take, LMs aren't great estimators, because they're text generation machines. So they're gonna use all of the references that they've ever been trained on to say like, well, this project should take 8.5 weeks. And I every time I make a plan, I use plan driven development. It has some like caption on the end of like, here's the development time. It's like weeks 1 and 2 do this, weeks 4 and 5 do that, and it's like, oh, great, this is an 8 week project. I'm like, I'm gonna be done with this probably by the end of the day and have some PRs open for it. So like LLMs themselves are not great estimators, but as a non-technical person, you can start to like scope down the sheer volume of time it takes to work on code. That doesn't absolve us from still having to understand their system, the system design, the data flow, the user requirements. There's just a ton of work that still goes into building software
Yeah.
other than just generating code. Code has always just been an artifact of the work. Um, someone that's doing a punch card is writing code in a different form than someone that is writing, a high level programming language today. But the work was really about thinking through the system and the problem and the data and not generating a bunch of code. And so, yeah, that 5 week time is now much less about the actual coding exercise and much more about like how long is it going to take you to get the definitions of what you want to build, who you're building for, those things. So, yeah.
Makes sense. Is there anything keeping you up at night? Anything that makes you nervous about where this trend may be going?
I think there's some, skill atrophy that happens. Like you mentioned it, like how do you, you wrote a bunch of, Google Sheet formulas. I don't write a lot of code anymore. But I have a long background of writing a bunch of code. So for junior engineers that don't have a ton of experience writing code, and like the problems that come up with writing code, learning how to like read code and understand code is going to be a challenge. Like, I don't know how you do. I don't have an answer for this yet. I don't know how you do that if you don't just get hands on keyboard for a long time and understanding the trade-offs that code has. Because that's really what you're doing as a software engineer is making a bunch of trade-offs of like, I can write code this way or that way. Both are functionally correct, but like they come with certain decisions and baggage. And if you don't have the experience, I don't know if how you gain that experience if the agent's doing a lot of that work. So, making sure as someone that's, learning how to code that you're asking the agent to explain the code and think through it, seeing different scenarios is probably the best way. That's probably my biggest fear. And, if I get on planes a lot for, conferences and events and whatnot, um, when I don't have, airplane Wi-Fi is not great. And so, if I'm doing agentic coding, I'm like, wait, you want me to actually like open a file and like write code because the Wi-Fi is just too terrible. So my own like comfort level in writing and handwriting everything has definitely, taken a hit this year.
So it's
So
not like when the calculator came out and we all said, we don't need to learn how to do long division anymore. We got this thing. There's going to be a problem if we do not have people that understand how to write, because how are they going to be able to do code review?
yeah, the reality is, we're still writing code. LLMs are still generating the same code that we were generating 5 years ago, just doing it at a much faster pace. And so production systems still run the same way. All of those things, none of that has changed yet. And I think they will. But right now, we've built mostly a faster horse. And we haven't yet invented the combustion engine to like move us out of, So yeah, like the skill of what code does, the trade-offs, the architecture decisions, a microservice architecture is so much different than a monolith and how those sort of like those systems interplay with each other that you still have to understand the code. You can't just, the talk I give a lot is, vibes won't cut it because you can't just let it go. You can for certain things, maybe an internal tool, a little like hobby project, whatnot. But if you want to ship code to production that's going to have users, then you need to understand it because not yet AI isn't going to can't answer that page and sort of debug, a complex system. Yeah.
It's 2030. This all gets wildly crazy adoption rate. What does 2030 look like?
So yeah, kind of alluded to it. I think that's, where we might get to is a world where you can sort of trigger an agent based upon some kind of input, right? So like I want to build a feature or, a user's requested something. You can have the entire software development lifecycle kind of encapsulated through agents all the way through it. So both planning the feature, through coding the feature, through testing that feature, through running it and operating in a production. When it fails, it gets an alert. An agent audits that alert and decides what fix needs to happen. And just like that's now the new input for the next cycle of this. And then you've got agents running software all of the time and building all that software. So there's just going to be so much more software. And if you imagine our world today, there's honestly like not that much software in it relative to the way you read I'm a sci-fi reader. If you read sci-fi, like there's software in everything.
Yeah.
So we need a world where we can put software in everything and we can't all maintain that. And there's just a lot of software still to be built, but I do see a world where agents can do every one of those phases of software development. And then everybody kind of gets, if you have that, then everybody gets custom software. You get, instead of buying some off the shelf software that sort of solves your problem, you can have a system that's built just for you, the way your business wants to operate, that way, your sort of requirements. And that's, I think, a really exciting time to see like what new kinds of software we're even going to build. That's how we get to the combustion engine from the
Yeah.
horses we're at now.
Love it. All right, Chris Kelly, head of product, Augment Code. Thanks for coming by.
Yeah, thanks a lot,
Appreciate it.
Frank. Appreciate it.